That was a sad cat. There's a much cuter cats.
Getting ready here, gang. So, okay.
I told my daughter I was having do this thing with you today. Or do you remember her? She goes, "Oh yeah, she started after I left." I said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
Okay. So,
So she played soccer in college.
everybody
Nobody wants a muffin?
Everybody from home,
It was
welcome.
in
This is
school,
a
no,
little different than the regular
Susan
Life
did
Mars
it.
House activity, but this is going to be exciting for us. We've got some really neat folks in here, and we're really excited. Joe Sacco, we've known for a long time since our kids went to school together. So, but Joe's going to be kind of moderating the proceedings, and so I'm going to step out of the way. I'm going to make sure our feeds are all going. It looks like we are. Mars,
Yep,
can see
Twitch
it?
is up.
We're good. Okay. Well,
Facebook
welcome
is
everybody.
up.
Hello there, and welcome to this special Free Speech Society event. We've been here since December of 2016, and initially we were created, as many of you know, to provide a platform for open discussion where all opinions are valued and therefore encouraged. And so we just thought that it was time to bring more civil discussion back to political talk. And so with us today, speaking today and taking questions from you on the topic of what can you do as one person to become a better citizen, to help move us forward in a more enlightened way that builds consensus and continues to value the opinions of those, whether they agree with you or disagree with you. And today we have Congressman Don Bacon. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Alexis Martinez, a columnist for the World Community columnist for the World Herald, and also Dr. Jonathan Benjamin Alvarado from University of Nebraska at Omaha. Give you a little bit of a background on our speakers, and then I will yield the floor to Ms. Martinez first. And Alexis Martinez is a community columnist for the Omaha World Herald, as I said. She's an active Omaha community advocate for racial equality and engaged with the Black Lives Matter movement. Ms. Martinez.
Yes,
welcome.
thank you guys for having me. Just kind of to go into the question that you posed and what we can do as citizens, and I'd like to say that I think it's time that we decide to stop tolerating one another and to start celebrating each other. And for so long our society has been so individualistic, and I think it's time that we move into a more we community. We as a state, we as a city, we as a country. Barack Obama taught us that, it is the fundamental belief that I am my brother's keeper and I am my sister's keeper, and that's what makes this country work. And so, one of my favorite authors, Valerie Kaur, has wrote a book about See No Stranger. And, and so now that we've all connected in this room, I'm not going to see you guys as a stranger anymore. I'm going to see you as uncles or as brothers. And so that creates trustworthiness in between us. And so that's going to create, a sense of community and a sense of, togetherness and connection. And Robert Putnam, the public policy professor at Harvard, talks about, our social capital refers to connection among individuals. And I think that that's something that we've swayed so far from. And he has a book coming out that talks about, we've peaked as a society together in 1960, and it was racially exclusive. And from 1960, we've just declined. And so it's time for us to decide in our hearts, are we going to be on the uphill battle going together as we, or are we going to stay in individualistic society? And I think a big part of that, for me, I had the luxury of being in multicultural, multiracial schools, and I go to a multiracial church. And so, at Central, I always used to talk about, this is what the real world was like. I had friends who were rich and white. I had friends who were poor and white. I had friends who were, black and poor, and I had friends who were black and rich. And so, we were around so many different cultures that we just built a community within ourselves. And I never even knew like how bad the racial tension was in America until, you know, I left there and I was like, wow, well, maybe this isn't really how the real world gets along. And so I always talk about, you know, how children get along so much better than adults because, you know, they're not aware of their differences and they just want to play. And so what can we learn from them? Can we learn how to just get along with one another? And it's kind of sad and heartening that we have to have these conversations because we're the human race. You know, it's not black versus white. And I'll move that into the Black Lives Matter movement. For me, that movement it wasn't black versus white. It was black, white, Hispanic, Asian versus hate, versus racial discrimination, versus police brutality. And so, you know, those protests this summer, we were, solidified in our culture, and it was so awesome just to see everybody together. And how can we take that and move forward? And so, you know, the biggest thing is that, you know, it's the hard work. It's a decision to be made. You know, am I going to stay in the I or am I going to be on the uphill battle to the we? And I think we can do that. So, yeah, thank you.
Ms. Martinez, thank you very
Yeah.
much. I think now we will ask Dr. Benjamin Alvarado for his opinion.
You know, for me, as a person who's been teaching college students for over a quarter century, for me it begins with better civics education. I had a false impression that students come to college prepared knowing the role of civics and their duties as citizens, and boy, have I been wrong. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't want to pin the blame on the public schools because it seems to be all the students that I encounter. It doesn't matter what background that they come from. And I think that's really unfortunate because for me, I think that it's imperative that young people, before they get into the world, have a better understanding of their abilities. That's something I learned as in the military, that you have rights, but you also have significant responsibilities. And that how that is different than politics. Because politics is a vehicle for achieving power more than anything else. And I'm pretty open about that when I talk to students, that really is, and that being a citizen and being part of the political system is not one and the same. They're distinct universes. And so I feel an obligation as an educator, to model that behavior for our students, to model that behavior for the folks that I live in the community. That's one of the reasons why I am very, very intentionally engaged with my community writ large. I mean, I'm overextended all the time. But I feel that if I'm not doing that, if I'm not providing that model, if I'm not showing that example to people, then really I am not living up to what the state of Nebraska hired me to do back in the year 2000 when I came here. I mean, they hired me to teach people about democracy, period. And I take that charge very, very seriously. The thing that I'd also like to share is that we need to be kind and gentle with people, because what we know of them is what we know of an iceberg. We only know the very top of that. We don't know the totality of their life's experience. I cannot make assumptions about where that individual has come from, what they've experienced, how life has either favored them or disfavored them. And so I have to figure out a way to treat them first and foremost as humans, and to always see and elevate the humanity within them. And I tell them that very purposefully at the very beginning of the semester. I said, if I haven't insulted you by the end of the semester in a political science class, I did not do my job. I don't take sides. I don't play favorites. I want to lay it out the way that it is and allow you, utilizing whatever it is that we've provided you as an analytical framework, to be able to discern for yourself. But I don't want your opinion, I want your analysis. And so that for me is very important. The other part of it that I think is important to talk about now, especially because I think we've really fallen off the trail, and Congressman Bacon, if you'll allow me, I'm going to paraphrase your colleague in Capitol Hill, Representative Jamie Gaskin. A few years back, he said that we place our hand on the Bible and swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, not the other way around. And I consistently remind people of that, in spite of the fact that I am deeply spiritual and very religious. But at the end of the day, as you, with your career in the armed forces, me, myself as well, is that we took an oath to uphold the Constitution and to protect it. And I think we've lost that. I think that we've lost that sentiment, that sensibility, And so what unfortunately has happened is that our society has its fallback now is that we've got a lot of smug hatred, both on the right and the left. Hatred of folks who would call themselves patriots or liberals or feminists. We take pleasure in mocking the left and the right. It's fueled by the ugliest impulses on both sides. If you think about cancel culture, what the heck is that all about? Ultimately, too, what it does then, it boosts those people who do get into the political game. Not all people, and I'll let you speak for yourself, Congressman Bacon, but we've got a good relationship, and we understand that. And whatever their policy preferences, that at the end ends up being solely based on identity and populism. For me, that is not democracy. The other thing that I would say is that it should not be a zero sum. The gain of any one group does not necessarily imply the loss for another. And I think that I'm going to charge the political class to maybe upping their game a little bit and beginning to provide our general public with a better sense of that. And I think that means more direct communication. It doesn't always happen. And I know it's got to be exceedingly difficult with the multiple, inputs from different media on all the different platforms. Where are you going to get your real information? And I'm going to kick it back to the elected officials and say, part of your responsibility is to help us to know where we're at and to see perhaps what it is that we can do collectively. Because it's true that, we're all going to sink or swim together, And I think our challenge now as good citizens, responsible educators, and elected officials is to help to get all those boats rowing in the right direction. So that's my opening statement there.
Doctor, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for those insightful
Absolutely.
comments. Viewers, I'd like to also encourage you now to start to formulate some questions and post them for us. We'll start to collect them and get them ready for our presenters here in just a minute. But I think it's time to give the floor to Congressman Bacon.
And I go by Don.
Okay.
So, hey, I sure appreciate being here today, so thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the comments from Dr. Benjamin Alvarado and Alexis. I relate to both of the comments, frankly. I remember I was raised on a farm, corn and soybean farm. I was a conservative family, a Christian conservative family, and that's all I knew. I graduated out of high school at 16. And I just assumed if you went to church, you're a conservative Republican, because that's all I knew. And then I went to a college, and it gets to Dr. Benjamin Alvarado's point that it broadened my horizons. I saw people with the same faith as me that had different political opinions. And that was the beginning of my growing. Okay, there's how I learned to expand my expectations of people and realize everyone's different. But yet we can still have the same faith and have some diverse opinions. So I learned a lot in college, and in fact my favorite classes were the same classes that Dr. Benjamin Alvarado taught. I love my political science classes, my history classes, and so I feel like I came out better. Then what Alexis was saying about Central High School, I felt that way about my 30 years in the Air Force. I worked with folks of all backgrounds, every race, every economic status in their childhoods, and yet we had the same objective, that was to serve our country. We had the same mission. We didn't think of each other as Republican or Democrat. We just worked together. I always felt like I worked with America's best. And in fact, my first supervisor was an African American captain when I was a lieutenant. He took me under his wings. Was a great mentor, and I don't know that I would have made one star if it wasn't for this first supervisor that got me on the right track. But I really feel like society should be that way as much as we can. I feel like this is the best of our society. There, a meritocracy where we're judged on our performance and our character, obviously not by the color of our skin. I come to this question that you ask, how can we make a difference? I come to that question from maybe a couple different standpoints. One, as an individual, I start with my faith. I believe in the Bible. I believe God wants us to treat people with decency. We're all God's children, and to love one another. That's one of His biggest commandments right there. To love others like He loved us, and He gave His life for us. I also think prayer is important. I think we need to be praying for our country. We need prayer right now. We have some serious divisions. We live in the greatest country in the world, but yet the biggest threats internally, this internal divide. And so I think there needs to be more tolerance, more forgiveness, more mercy towards each other. I think part of that is also being able to empathize better. I feel like in our society, we've lost that art of empathy, putting ourselves in other people's shoes and understanding where they came from. And I've really enjoyed that as part of my job. I meet people that have such different backgrounds than me in this job, and I like putting myself in their shoes and trying to understand how do they come to the same conclusion, or the conclusions they did, though they may differ with mine. But empathy, I think, is sorely lacking today. And also, I think it's one thing to disagree on policy and specific positions. It's a different thing to judge a person's character and motivations, and I think they're by far different. And we got to stop doing the latter. It's all right to disagree on different policy points, but I think we're too quick to judge people's motivations and their character, and we use that as a tax. And then it's very hard to come together on another issue, because if you've called me a racist or whatever it may be, or I call you something terrible, then it's hard on the next thing that we have to work on to come together and solve. Those wounds become deep. Now, as a leader, and I commanded 5 organizations, I've also learned that the most important part of leadership is trust. And people need to trust your character. They may disagree with you, but they need to know that at least your motivations are pure, that you care for the mission, you care for the team more than yourself. And people want to know that you care for them. It starts with little things: eye contact, a smile, decency, and listening. I've always taught you listen 2 times more than you speak, right? And I think that's a big part of leadership there. Then the final part, if I come from a political angle, which that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years or in Congress, and then ran for a year before that, we have a big divide in our country. And campaigns, no matter how you do it, they're going to be tough, especially if you live in a 50-50 district. You're going to be banging heads, and it's going to be a tough campaign. It's just the nature of the beast. That's what political campaigns are. But after the campaigns, we need to be able to come together, shake hands, and find areas of consensus. And Dr. Benjamin Alvarado sort of pointed to that. You can't just be a 0+ game, Republican versus Democrat. When we do that, nothing happens. We get gridlock, and it gets hateful, and it's just ugly. We got to look for areas of consensus. And I've been rated the top 7% for bipartisanship because I am seeking areas of agreement. And I don't want to compromise my values, but I do know we can agree on some things on immigration and healthcare. And if we could take 50% of a loaf, we should move forward. But we've lost that ability to do that in recent years. Congress was known for deal making 2 decades ago, and I don't see a lot of deal making going on now. And it really starts with being able to find areas of consensus and moving forward. So again, thank you for the opportunity to let me be in here.
Thank you, Don. I have a kind of a question to segue into from that last point that you made. As a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, what practical political advantage do you see with both sides working together?
Well, the Problem Solvers Caucus has been great. I didn't start off in that my first term. Still trying to get my feet on the ground. I see myself as a conservative, but after 2 years, I realized that if you're in a Republican House, you can pass anything you want. If it's a majority, doesn't mean anything gets passed in the Senate. And so, in other words, you can be passing a lot of bills and nothing happens. And so, therefore, I took notes saying, if you want to get something done in our federal system, and I should have known this because I've been studying it since I was a teenager. I worked for a congressman at 20, and also when I retired out of the military. But my main takeaway for the first 2 years, you have to sit down with folks on the other side of the aisle and find a compromise on major legislation. That's what will get passed out of the Senate, and that's what the president will sign. Now that's what becomes permanent. Whereas if you try to do something in a very partisan way, it is not permanent. The next Congress, if it's a different party, they're just going to get rid of it. Or if it's done by executive order, the next president's just going to get rid of it via executive order. The only permanent, long-standing things that get done is when Republicans and Democrats in Congress find 50% agreement on something and try to pass that. And that's what sticks. And so I've enjoyed it. I work right now with 28 Democrats in the Problem Solvers Caucus, and many of them are my best friends on the other side of the aisle. And that's who I look to first to find bipartisan agreement on various legislation I'm working on. They come to me on their bills first. And I think it's the foundation right now that we can build on in the House, where we can expand this consensus building. I'm also part of the For Country Caucus. It's 25 veterans, almost half and half Republican and Democrat. And we're going to try to do the same thing on national security issues and service issues. But to me, this is how we've cured the House. It's through 50-50 teams of Democrats and Republicans trying to work together.
Okay,
So I'm going to build on it.
thank you very much. I have a question related to that for Dr. Benjamin Alvarado. Do you believe that the parties, both parties, benefit from divide? And how could we change that?
You know, that's a great question, and I've spent a lot of time teaching democratic theory, and there's 5 elements of what constitutes a fully consolidated democracy. And obviously, you know, it is civil society is a big part of it. I'm glad we're having this discussion today. The rule of law is an important part of it. Having functioning bureaucracies, you know, if you've ever lived in a foreign country and tried to get something done, it's a whole different world out there, you know. And having a really regulated economy, but core to that is having a vibrant political society, which means that you have fully functioning political parties that help to grow the bench, so to speak, so that we have individuals, young folks who are energized and wanting to serve society, have an opportunity to go into and serve in the government. And you know, Congressman Bacon's a rarity now. The number of retired or former military continues to shrink exponentially. So he's in a distinct minority. When generations past, there was a lot more of those types of individuals serving our country. That's problematic in my view. It's problematic because I think a lot of people get into politics for the wrong reason. They go in there to pad their resume or to feather their nest. They don't go in to serve. And I think that for me has been one of the biggest reasons why we're having problems in Congress today. That we have people who are there for all the wrong reasons. You know, at the end of the day, it's true. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that we have to try to figure a way to get away from that. And so I'm encouraged when I do hear individuals speak about, you know, trying to reach across the aisle. And of course, you know, before Congressman Bacon, Congressman Ashford tried to do that, he got beat over the head. You know, Chuck Hagel got beat over the head for reaching across the aisle to try to work with the other party. There's something fundamentally wrong with our system when you have individuals, and in both those cases, long-term public servants being bashed for doing what we've asked them to do. That I think that really makes me angry, because I have a lot of respect for individuals that take up the mantle of public service and then just to be kind of just, you know, run out of the town on a rail. I think, you know, it's probably one of the most disgraceful things that I've seen since I've lived in Nebraska. I got the world of respect for Chuck Hagel. He shed blood for this damn country, and he'd be treated that manner because he's working with folks. That needs to change. I'm sorry. That needs to change.
Thank you. Moving along that same line, but I'm going to pivot just a little bit here, Ms. Martinez. Thinking about the ways that people will engage one another, I'm going to ask this question of you from your leadership role as a college athlete and your leadership role as someone involved in different social causes and your leadership role as your columnist position at the World Herald. Individuals now, and we were going back to the original question of what can individuals do to help with this situation, thinking about the political divide and whether someone is in politics for the right reason or the wrong reason. Give me a perspective from someone much younger than me about your generation, leadership, how that affects who actually runs for office and gets elected, and will they do the work of the people once they get there? How do you affect that as one citizen?
I think that the biggest thing, like Don Bacon said, is that Congress Don Bacon said it was about trust. Like, it's so important that, like, we trust these political leaders in office to represent us, and whether they're Republican or Democrat, that they're going to do the work of the people. And I think that that's kind of the biggest thing that I've learned in my leadership roles is, you know, it's not about what you think or what you want to happen, it's about the people that you represent. And I think that that's, you know, one of the biggest things in and what I've learned as a captain or as the class president, and as a community columnist writer, is that, you know, it's always about taking care of the people first. And so once you take care of the people and you connect with them, you become friends with them, and you won't let anything bad happen to them. You won't make policies against them. You will represent them in a way that you would, again, going back to the brother and sister method, like, we are going to be a family and we're a community, and so therefore I trust you to do the right thing as a leader.
Thank you. Don, I'm going to pose this question to you. This is from Free Speech member Jean Reiner. And Jean mentions that a lot of people, and she's talking specifically about just friends of hers, don't want to talk about politics. Yet there are many of us who believe that that is a fundamental property of being a good citizen. What do people do to engage in productive political discourse with one another, you know, one-on-one, and make it something where it's respectful?
Well, thank you, Gene. I totally agree, by the way. I agree with you. Politics is important, and who we elect, our representative of government runs the country. And thankfully, I love our federal system. I mean, what happens in D.C. Should be a more minor role versus what happens at the state, what happens at the city level. Our school boards are also separate. And so we have a beautiful system. We have to talk about politics if you want to learn about issues and be engaged in our country. But yet, today, it's real easy to be demonized when you do get involved. I mean, you get attacked. People are so quick to attack versus just have a civil conversation. And I'm not going to plead that I'm purely innocent. I try my best, but you know, sometimes I look back and say, I wish I would have done that better this way, or should have done maybe this better. I think a little bit of reflection is good for everybody here. But we have to be able to disagree and converse about it without judging the other person's character and their motivations. I think good people can disagree. You know, and I listen to the other panelists here. There's probably some core issues that we fundamentally just disagree on. Doesn't make Alexis bad or me bad or, you know, our professor bad. It just means we have differences of opinion, and how we respond to that is very important. Still we should have mutual respect and talk through it. And again, if we're in the political sphere, we may have different ideas. I'll just pull out one category on immigration. However, maybe we could agree on half of the stuff, and maybe that's what we build a bill around and pass a half solution for the time being. And then in subsequent years, we can work on other parts to keep moving forward. But if we do nothing, we just sit in neutral. And so I think it's important, even where we disagree, find areas where we do agree and try to move forward on that. And understand we're going to disagree on some things, but we ought to be respectful in those disagreements.
Thank you. Doctor, question for you. This comes from Free Speech member Steve Reese. You spoke about working across the aisle, okay? And polarization just does not encourage the concept of working across the aisle. With polarization, how do we get out of this mess?
Well, I'm gonna actually go back in time a little bit. So there used to be something called the Fairness Doctrine that was federal law, and that if you presented anything in the public through television or radio, you also had to offer an opportunity for the contending view to be presented at the very same time. I grew up with this, and I think for me, when it ended in the 1980s, that's when you begin to see the erosion of seeing people as humans, and that it allowed for a polarized kind of view, and actually a mischaracterization of individuals. Is that what happens as a consequence of where we live today and how we live, is that people are rendered unidimensional, you know? I mean, some people are only ever going to see me as a brown man, period. They will never ascribe any other values to me. And because I'm a brown big man, they're going to also kind of perhaps ascribe some negative values to me. That happens in both directions, and I think we have to figure out a way. And it's incumbent upon the leadership class of this country today to begin trying to kind of do what the congressman said of reinvigorating this notion of empathy, of extending grace to one another in a very meaningful and intentional way so that we can kind of rehumanize them. I think that this is something that's been a constant since the 1980s, and as it's eroded, we have no base to see each other as humans more than anything, you know. And it goes to this notion of trust, and I'm going to kind of add a little bit to that. Trust is comprised of two things. It's my ability to have confidence in you to be able to do what you're supposed to do in society, and then I can rely upon you to get it done. But it has to be demonstrated over time. And we only have to violate that one time, and guess what? Trust is gone. So because we don't have that, we don't talk about it, you know. Life today is a great Thanksgiving family dinner where we don't talk about religion, sex, and politics. I mean, that was the one thing they told us in the armed forces. You go home for Thanksgiving, you don't talk about religion, sex, and politics. Well, what are the most exciting things in the world? You know? And so for me, I think we have to figure out a way, we have to be much more intentional. Thank you for this forum, because I think it really helps us to kind of begin thinking about how we can very intentionally do this and do it in a meaningful way, not providing lip service. This isn't a 30-second PSA. This is really what we need to be doing all the time.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, Doug Seaman asks, do you think social media amplifies tribal behavior? And what kind of responsibilities do we have as individuals to maybe ensure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I think people get a little bit out of character on social media, but I think that social media is also a platform to learn about, you know, both sides, Republican and Democrat, both sides of the parties. But I think that when we can do it in a respectful manner, like I think that, you know, we haven't been the best in being able to extend our views and our positions on things because it's behind, you know, a device. So some things that I may not say in person to somebody, you know, I might be able to say over, you know, social media. And I think that we have gotten completely out of line with some of the things that are on social media and the way in which we talk to each other, because we wouldn't talk to each other like that in person. And so maybe, you know, if you are, you know, in a debate with somebody over social media, or you see something you don't like, how about we call them on the phone, or how about we go take them to coffee and it's like, okay, let's talk about this. And I've had to do this with, you know, even my extended family, like some things that maybe we don't see eye to eye on, but at Sunday dinner, we get to talk about it face to face, because there are some things that you know, can get, you know, misconstrued on the internet or you know, over text message. And I think that that's just super important. And I'm saying this as a millennial, to kind of get off of the phones and start having those conversations in person. And then I understand that your experiences are different than my experiences. And so I now know that you're going to think or vote or feel some type of way about a situation differently than I am, because we don't have the same shared experiences. We're all different. And I think that that's just another important thing, that we're able to have those conversations in person and kind of, you know, not so much that, you know, the super harsh Facebook posts and conversations online. So
Thank you. Doctor, same question to you. Social media and tribalism, what can we do?
Well, that's a rabbit hole that far too many people have gone down, and I think that it really serves more than anything else to very much divide us, because you can get into an echo chamber and everybody will agree with your statement, or you know, or you can engage in it, and it's really ugly, to be honest with you. Some of the things that people have the willingness to say over social media that they would never say to you in person. You know, and so one of the things we're trying to do at the university through a local nonprofit is really begin to kind of give people, especially young people, get them before they become addicted to this monster, to how to conduct themselves in a manner that's not going to be harmful. You know, the thing that we tell students, that once you put it out there, it's forever. It's never going to go away, you know. And if you ever hope to get a job with any kind of you know, high security clearance or in any kind of sensitive materials, all those things will come back to haunt you. And so you need to be very careful and judicious of what it is that you're posting. And people think, well, that's never going to matter to me because, I'm a free agent. I can do whatever the heck I want to. Well, you know what? Employers are looking for this. If you're going to law school, they're going to look at what you said on social media. So people need to be exceedingly careful. As while it's certainly a wonderful instrument to communicate with other people, and especially for aggrieved populations, if they've never had a chance to voice what their life's experience is about, I think that's an important venue for them. But you got to be cautious. You got to be careful.
Thank you. Don, your comments on the situation, and then let me add one thing to that too. If you have any ideas of what kind of tangible things can citizens do in their use of social media, obviously you are embroiled with that, or your staff at least is embroiled with that all the time, because it's a method of communication. It's a
Right.
channel. So speak to that as well.
I'd like to echo the comments. Some of the social media has gotten so vile, so aggressive and egregious in the things they tell other people. It's just really so much, and it's on both sides. I've seen it on both sides of doing it, and it's really ugly. Unfortunately, it's seeping out of the social media now into how people actually interact. You see it in some of our town halls, both ways. Again, people now have no problem being right in your face, whereas you can disagree respectfully without just the terrible comments people make towards each other. So I'm starting to see it more seeping out of the social media into real discussions. That's not a good thing. I'd like to your point, we have to remember in the political world that social media does not equal reality. Twitter world is not reality. I've seen people that are so proud of their followers, and the whole world evolves around who's getting ratioed, but yet they're losing elections, right? And the core of American voters are not riding this Twitter wave every day. They may catch a little glimpse of it here or there, or the Facebook. The average person they're working, they got their family, they're watching maybe a little news, maybe they got their friends on Facebook. Twitter world is not reality, but we do use it in our office a lot to engage with the media. That we put out our press releases, we put out things that we did that day to show people what we're working on. So it is a very useful tool to communicate what we're working on. But I also know when you read the back and forth, that's a side group that's extraordinarily active politically. We're the more radical types. That's not the core of the voters right there.
And as an aside to that also, I'm going to kind of move you a little bit further down that road. This is a question from Rick Jensen, Free Speech member. A lot of time and effort is spent, and especially coming from social media, on putting the person at the forefront and putting policy in the back. And so what happens is discussions and criticisms end up becoming more about the person and less about the policy. His question is, how can you move, or how can we help to move the discussion back to the policy,
Right.
and not demeaning the person?
Right. It should be about policy when we disagree, and not attacking the character again and motivations of the person involved. On our social media, we try to do things on votes that are coming up or bills I'm proposing. That's like a sphere of it. The other sphere is if I do 5 or 6 events that day in the community, I like letting our constituents know that we're working. And so like later on today, we're going to be recognizing some great leaders in the African American community for Black History Month. So I like to let the district know who we're recognizing and why. So I think part of my social media is more what we're working on, what we're doing, who we're seeing. And then the other part is the policy, and it's the bills that we're working on. And so there's like 2 different lanes that we're operating in on this. On top of that, then I have a political social media too that's more aggressive on the political side for like elections. So you have to keep those separated. In the end, I believe that we have to be respectful in this. Again, I'm going to acknowledge it's tough when you're in the middle of a campaign and it's, you're a 50-50 district, and you have to ask yourself, how do you respond if someone says, hey, when they're talking to me, you're trying to pollute our water on TV, or you're trying to take away my retirement. So you're going to have this system is naturally built during campaigns. There's going to be some friction there, but there's some lines we shouldn't cross too, and that's where some self-reflection comes in when you cross the line or not. it's always better to focus on the policy versus the person and the character, and we try to do that. And yet you got to reflect on it. I think sometimes, you got to say, okay, you know what? I think I want to move a little more over here because I don't feel comfortable what we're doing, right there. So there's a lot of self-reflection goes on in this business, but it's a contact sport. You have opposing ideas, and you got to ask yourself, how do you respond to when you're getting attacked? That's not true, and so that's where it gets hard. And so we try our best, and then you try to do better as you look backwards.
And sometimes it's better maybe to just say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
And don't inflame. Doctor, you had a
No, it just,
comment about that?
I think it's imperative actually that when somebody's screaming at you, to really try to remain calm.
Mhm.
But try to also understand where that individual is coming from. Why are they there?
Mhm.
How did they get there? And because I don't want to be in the practice of denying or minimizing what is aggrieved that individual. And I know that if I know anything that came out of the Black Lives Movement this summer, it's that there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of harm that's been done that does need to be acknowledged, that we need to account for in a very meaningful fashion, and we have to begin crafting policies and responses that speak directly to that. We just can't talk past it any longer. This took 400 years to get to where it's at. It's not going to be solved in a day, but we better position ourselves in a manner that is a lot more responsive to it. I think that for anybody engaged in the public sphere, that's imperative today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, your most recent column in the Omaha World Herald
Yeah.
was a reflection on Angela Davis.
Yeah.
And you mentioned specifically that Angela Davis asks us to reflect on Black history beyond the faces and into what Black people and their allies faced in their struggle for freedom. And you said, Ms. Angela Davis, I honor you and will do just that. So some of us who are older remember Angela Davis. And we remember her as being radical and a little less than a role model, right? Considering your participation in Black Lives Matter, what's the appropriate line, do you believe, for those who engage in social disruption between those constitutionally sanctioned peaceful protests and the protests that end up in rioting?
Right. I do not incite violence, and I do not encourage violence. I don't encourage, burning of buildings. But there is a very thin line of the people that are there to do the work of what we are called to do as far as standing up for what we believe in. And then I believe that there are people that attend the protest just to get riled up. And, I don't agree with that, but when people talk to me about the Black Lives Matter movement and they bring up, okay, well, how do you feel about, the rioting and the violence? And I'm like, that's not even what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. Talk to me about police brutality. Talk to me about how you can be better as a citizen. Please don't talk to me more about the violence, because I'm not a part of the violence. And maybe, those conversations should be had, the people who are inciting the violence. But I think it goes both ways. I mean, I've seen police officers incite the violence. And, I'm a part of the peaceful side of the protests and doing the hard work and, standing up for what we believe in, because there is a problem in this country with police brutality. And, it's the other side of the people maybe that aren't there for the right reasons that are, responsible for the violence and for getting, for the rioting and stuff. But I mean, I think it goes both ways. I think it's the responsibility of the citizens and the police officers that there's that thin line in between there that, maybe my experience with the police officer wasn't that great last time, and now I have a chance to scream in his face. But it's also a lot of that hurt, like you were talking about. We're tired of the trauma and seeing what we're seeing on TV every few months. And so, I think it's, again, we got to take responsibility as citizens, and we got to take responsibility as government officials, as police officers for, the change.
Thank you. Don, question for you. This is from Victor Hahn. Victor talked about Americans feeling like we're rugged individuals and we enjoy freedom like no other country in the world, and I can do it my way, the American way. With all of that individualism and people seeming to encamp themselves in places where working together doesn't seem anything except maybe just abdicating those freedoms, how do we come together in that environment? Especially, we have an administration that talked about America first, and now we have a new administration who is trying to kind of tear down America first because they believe that collaboration on a world stage is much more important. What do we do as individuals to say, I'm a proud American and I'm free, but at the same time having the humility to step out of that and say, it's more valuable for me to hear your viewpoint?
Well, it's a great question, Victor. That is very much in our DNA, probably more so than maybe any other country. The individualism, it's rooted in our hundreds of years of history, and it's just how we've been raised. And yet, we have to collaborate in areas. So there's going to be a little bit of that. There's going to be a little bit of tension there. I think there always will be. How much are you individual versus how much do we have to cooperate and work together? And there's probably a healthy tension there. And I'm not sure there's actually a right answer, but part of that is solved by keeping power at the local level to the most that we can. I mean, I believe in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that delineates very specific duties for Congress and the federal government, and we want the states and the local government to really be the most important government devices that we have. But ultimately, we want the family and the individuals to have the most say in their lives. There's always going to be healthy tension here, but I think this is better served, that tension working out in our communities, because really I think that's where the most important part of making a difference in people's lives actually come. Our mayors, our city councils, our churches, even outside of government, the civil community that we have. I really don't have a solid answer because there's always going to be tension there. I believe in the individualism of our country, but yet I know we have to work together at the school boards, our city councils, our county commissioners, on up, to do things together to make life better for everyone. You can't do it all on your own. You're not going to pave sidewalks on your own in your city. You have to band together to do that. Don Bacon can't fill all the potholes. It's going to take a city coming together and charging taxes and doing it. So you have to have some collaboration to make life better. And there's always going to be tension where that's at, and that's why we have elections. That's why we have debates, because it's going to move over time, and people are going to feel differently in 5 years than they do now, and that's the beauty of our system.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, in 1901, President Theodore Roosevelt said that the fundamental rule of our national life, the rule which underlies all others, is that on the whole and in the long run, we shall go up or down together.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's just like economically, politically, culturally, like we have to be together. There's so many things that we can't do separated. We can't be afraid of each other. Like we're going to have to figure out how to work together as the human race.
And yet he was known as one of the most rugged individualists
Yeah.
ever to be president.
Right.
So let's move aside from that a little bit, but continuing on that thought, Doctor, this is a question for you. This comes from Dan Prescher. Dan asks, what really is the purpose of government? And more importantly, how do we reach consensus on what is good government unless we all agree on what good government really is?
Yeah, it's really one of the most salient points of what we're talking about, and thanks for the question. You know, I'm going to defer to James Baldwin, a black social commentator. There was a great book this last summer by Eddie Glaude Jr., a political scientist at Princeton, called Begin Again, and it really is a reflection upon James Baldwin's writing. And Baldwin says very clearly that in reference to what's the proper role of us in a political society, is that I said at the very beginning, we have rights and responsibilities. And key to that is that responsibility cannot be lost. You can only abdicate it. You can only be derelict in your duty to uphold the responsibilities that you have as a citizen. So if you choose to assume the responsibility, guess what? We can begin again. We can do all the things that we think that we are charged to do as a society. We can begin to work across the aisle when we assume full responsibility for what it means to be citizens. And I think that has been lost. Like I said, that's been one of my biggest disappointments as an educator, is to know and understand that people don't have any sense of that. And so, I actually go to some fundamental texts that I try to share with students when I was teaching on a regular before I became a full-time administrator, of trying to imbue them with those particular values. Because we can read the Constitution, but if you don't know what lies behind the Constitution, if you don't know the theory and the values that these individuals were really trying to kind of advance, then it's just all you're doing is rote memorization. Like, granted, when I was in the 7th grade, we had to be able to recite the preamble to the Constitution. I remember that I languished over it. I remember when I cried a couple nights because I couldn't get it right, and I knew that if I didn't get that right, when I was called upon to do it, I was going to get a mark against me, But it's only later on that I began to understand, and actually it was my time in the service where I began to understand that particular reality. That, I had significant responsibilities. And so I spent a lot of my time talking to officers as an enlisted man. Well, why do we do this? What does this mean? What is important about this? And I was fortunate that they were willing to spend, we spent a lot of time talking. A little bit of action, you do all your preparation for that 45 minutes of action that you're engaged in, but everything is preparing for that. So I had a lot of opportunity to reflect and respond to differences that I understood. And like Congressman Bacon says, people from every single corner of the country. I had the deepest appreciation of being American once I joined the Navy and was able to go all over the world representing my country and serving it, but also interacting from people from every single corner of the country whose lives experience were distinctly different than mine. I grew up in a beach community in Southern California. Talk about carefree. I didn't understand what it meant to live in major urban centers or to be in rural America or the South or the Midwest. And so, that's one of the reasons why I went into education and public service.
Don, I'm going to ask you a question kind of related to that. This is from Mike McDonald. What kind of issues can be leveraged to help build consensus? What are things that we can build upon that we kind of share values for?
One of the things I'm working on in house right now is some service opportunities to expand. Not only about 1% of the people serve in the military. I think there's probably more that would like to serve, but for various reasons, maybe it could be health, it could be a variety of reasons, that maybe want to serve in a different way. So we want to expand areas that maybe, whether it's working in our urban areas, whether it's working overseas, helping out countries that need food aid. There's just so many different areas. Even our teachers, where we have maybe a shortage of teachers, a shortage of doctors, shortage of nurses. There's opportunities that maybe we can help pay off some education with a couple years of service in areas that our country needs it. So that's maybe something that we're working on. I think we're probably a year or two away from getting this passed and trying to figure out to what level that we want to do. Because this could be expensive or it could be partial, and we'll have to work our way through that. But right now there's about 25 of us in Congress trying to work on a service beyond just the military service, and then to use that as an opportunity to maybe pay off some school debts as well. But I think when we expand the service opportunities in our country, it gets to what Dr. Benjamin Alvarado was just saying, that you stop seeing yourself as an individual that came from, my case, Central Illinois farm boy, right? And then you start to meet people from the beaches of California and the Cape Cod there in the deep South, and you get put together and you're working on a mission serving your country, and it unifies you as an American. And so that's the goal here, is to build more unity and a love of the country, but also to help a person maybe pay off some college debt at the same time and try to find that balance. So that's something we're working on right now.
Okay. Ms. Martinez, do you want to talk about that? What kind of issues come up in your world when you think about this is a good starting point for where we can come together, because we probably share some values here and we can really honor the other side from this point before we start talking about our divisions?
Yeah, I think that the DACA, you're really heavily involved in that and support that, and I think that that's super important as we move forward in giving the immigrant children a chance in America. And I think that that's something that maybe both sides can agree on, I'd like to see more Republicans agree on it, like yourself. But can you talk more about, you know, your support in that and how we can come together?
So it's want to jump in?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was warned this week that my position there could be a liability down the road. I just don't think it. I've done enough polling in the district, and I believe it in my heart as a Christian too.
Yeah.
I mean, we have kids who came here, say 3 years old, now they're 16, 17. This is their home. This is
Yeah.
where they went to school. They're going to college. They're not going back to Honduras or wherever. They don't even know how to speak the language.
Yeah.
And so what I found in the district, 70% of our district supports that general area. You may get some to say, yes, I'm with you, Don, but I also want to work on security so that we don't continue to have these issues. So that's part of the conversation too.
Okay.
But some, in this political environment, you get people who will just take your stand here, and I'll have people say, Don, they'll use the open borders attack. And so I was actually warned this week that you're vulnerable to this. So it's interesting, but I think you can look at the pros and cons politically, but when you peel the onion back, what is morally right?
Yeah.
And I think, and you can win this argument by, I had talked to a group of folks who said, Don, we don't agree with you on DACA. And I said, so who here thinks we should deport a DACA kid back to wherever they're home? They're going to speak the language. They've been here for 15 years. They came here as a young kid, and I maybe had one hand was raised out of the whole
Right.
group. And I think that's how we get people to come over, because we have to have a plan. You can't just, I had one person say, Don, we don't want to do anything with DACA, just leave it the way it is. That's not fair to these kids. So there has to be a plan. There could be a little bit of debate what that plan exactly looks like, and that's where compromise comes in. But I found that if I just ask that question, who here supports deporting DACA, I only get maybe 1% or 2%.
Okay.
And we can coalesce and, okay, if that's the case, let's build a policy plan that makes sense.
Yes.
So that's about how I handle it. But it's yet, I'm told all the time it's a vulnerability for me, but I don't see it in the polling.
No. Yeah.
But when you do
Okay.
disagree about
Yeah.
anything, and more so, I think in the last 5-10 years in America, there's this culture of we and they.
Mhm.
There's a lot of not only discussion, but there's a lot of media that
Mhm.
uses the terms we and they. Okay,
Right.
along those lines, Doctor, this is directed at you because as the Vice Chancellor at UNO, you have a PhD in political science and you're active in UNO's Office of Latino American Studies. So by any definition, you are an academic leader in our community. And American society is becoming increasingly pluralistic in about every way possible. For most members of society, diversity seems to be an unnatural and difficult act. Would you agree?
Repeat that?
For most members of society, diversity seems to be an unnatural and difficult act.
Somewhat, yeah.
In the context of we and they. We like to
Right.
form ourselves
Right,
in a
right,
group.
right.
Okay?
Okay.
Share your views on how American society can overcome this natural propensity to pursue sameness.
Yeah. So, I'm a big music buff. I'm unapologetic, okay? And my brother's actually a reggae artist. And one of our favorite groups was Black Uhuru, really popular back in the 1980s. And one of their best songs was actually written by Miami Steve Van Zandt from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. And it's called Solidarity, okay? And there's a line in the song that goes, everybody wants the same thing, don't they? Everybody wants to have a happy end. Everybody wants to see the game on Saturday. Everybody wants to be somebody's friend. And then he says, look at me, I'm not your enemy. We stand on common ground. We don't need to fight each other. What we need is solidarity. And I think the country will find its way out of the quagmire that it's in right now as it relates to diversity, when they begin seeing the humanity in other people. The only way that we can do that is to begin to dissuade people from falling into the trap of the we and the they. While certainly there's elements of this notion of the rugged individual in the United States, that I think it's a myth. And myths are powerful because they make people do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. But there's also a fallacy to that particular myth, because the congressman knows darn well, were it not for the aggregate of individuals who come together to protect this country and to do the work of the nation, nothing gets done. So then we can go on with the fantasy of being rugged individuals without having any connection whatsoever to the reality that there's a whole literal army of people behind them making that possible. So that's where I think we have to defer to, and as a leader in the community, I consistently tell people, well, figure out a way, let's have a conversation, like the congressman alluded to. You don't want to send a 16-year-old kid who doesn't know anything other than Game Boy or Billie Eilish back to a country where none of that is relevant to them and they don't even speak a language. Who does that kind of stuff? Who is that mean and crass? And I think we have to also tell people that, I'm going to refer back to what I talked at the very beginning. This is not a zero sum. My gain doesn't necessarily imply somebody else's loss. We have to try to figure out to get to that kind of sweet spot where the rising tide does lift all boats, to Alexis's quote by Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt was a rogue in every single sense of the word. He never did what was expected of him. But the guy was also fabulously rich. He could do that. He could go off into the mountains of Montana and Wyoming and be a crazy man up there and form his own army and go and fight in Cuba. He could do that kind of stuff because he had the freedom and the latitude to do that. But that doesn't mean that there's a society that supports who we are. Freedom isn't free. There's a price to be paid for it. And people need to also know and understand it and not trivialize it. That for me is the other part of it. So much of what we do is trivialized, and I think it's imperative as we do this. You know, the other thing I'm a really strong, ardent proponent of is civil rights. I actually serve as the chairperson for the Nebraska Advisory Council to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And so everything and anything that I do professionally and personally has to do with the centrality and the sanctity of those rights. How do we find a way to protect them? And we've done a terrible job historically in this country. We've got a lot of work to do, but hey, listen, that's why we're here.
I'd like to add or go
Please.
back to the we and they. The conversation about diversity was always so silly to me because my mother is white and my father is black and Hispanic. So who is half of me we and half of me they? Or, you know, I never understood. Also because I was around diversity my whole life. I didn't know that, you know, I could walk into, you know, a place of work and there's only one race there or one culture, because that's never what I grew up in. And I think that plays a huge part in who I am and how I interact with, you know, people of all colors and all backgrounds. But like I said, it was just so silly that there was we and they, because I'm a makeup of so many different people and different cultures, and I have a great grandfather who is Jamaican and Barbados, and I have a great grandfather who is German, and it's just like, you know, it's awesome, and I love that I am so many different things put into one person. And so, like I said, that conversation about diversity was always so silly to me up until now, because I just thought, how can we be so separated as a nation when we have people like me who aren't even separated as a human being.
So thinking about we and they, staying on that topic a little bit, and I will pose this to all of you, but I'll pose it first to Don. Steve Reese asks, what are significant contributors in your estimation to the deep polarization? Let's just assume there's a deep polarization right now. What do you think? And all of you think about this, because I'll come to each panelist. What are the most significant contributors of deep polarization in your mind?
I do think social media plays a role. I think media in general plays a role in that. You can go to your own media source, hear what you want to hear, and so I subscribe to 7 magazines. Just as I'm trying to, and that's what I do on one of my flights to Washington and back. I'm always reading the magazine, trying to broaden my perspective on quite a few issues. So I think that's part of it. It's the media, the social media. We are continually attacking each other in ways that make it hard to reconcile. So, I mean, and I think it's both ways. Like I counted the other day, just for fun, how many times I was called racist on my social media. It was over 50 times. That kind of, and I know it goes both ways on both sides. So I'm not just picking on one side. But it's hard to I sense on the conservative side, they feel like they've been called that 4, 5, 6 years. The drugs of society, You can go on, and so there is a anger, and there are a lot of anger. They don't really care to reconcile because there's anger there. And I know on the other side, I'm sure it's the same thing, and we gotta this disparaging each other makes it hard then to come back together and have a good conversation and solve things we need as a country. So there has to be a little more grace. There's got to be forgiveness. We got to watch how we attack. Well, it's got to be on issues, not the individual. So I just think that divide's widening because the attacks are so brutal, and there's no desire then. There's a certain Democratic leader in the state. I'll give you an example. I didn't mind working with this person. I liked working with the person. Up until 2 or 3 years ago, she started throwing out these kind of attacks too, and now I don't want to work with her. That's not necessarily right. It should be forgiveness, but my point being is when you're labeled in the most nasty ways, it's hard to come back the next day. And I see it on both sides. So we got to figure out how to be decent. We're losing that level of decency in our discourse, and we got to regain that and know that my brother and sister on the Democratic side of the aisle, we can drink beer and have a good time, and we can work on issues and still disagree on some of the fundamentals, but we've lost that, and we got to regain it.
Doctor, you are you're thinking about deep polarization, and in your mind, and you've probably spoken about this to students and conferences. What are things that always keep crossing your list for the deepest polarization in America, and the reason for that?
It's because we don't know how to deal with change. We don't know how to articulate it. We don't know how to explain it to people. We don't know how to provide people with a way forward to kind of deal with the change that this country has had since the time that I was born. When I was born in California, 5% of the population was Latino. We all knew each other in the state of California. Believe it or not, across the state, in the little pockets and communities, somebody was related to somebody, or somebody had done, so 45% today. I don't even recognize California when I go home anymore. Love it. I love it that I can speak Spanish anywhere in the state of California. But the profound change that has taken place in California and across this entire country, societal, economic, demographic, racial. Who is trying to give us any kind of, guiding posts to how do we know and understand and live with? And so you can imagine somebody living in a rural community where their children left and never came back. They see the world spinning around them, and nobody's helping them. Nobody's providing them with any kind of guide to how to navigate through the world that we live in today. So what do? We fall back to the things that we know. And if the things that we know are just out of necessity or through default, racist, segregationist, sexist, that's where we are. And so, like I said, I put it clearly on the political class. Let's raise the ante on all the things that the congressman and his colleagues are trying to do. We need that in spades. We can't just allow one small composite element of our leadership to be talking about this. So it starts at the very top. And I'm hopeful that President Biden and his administration are providing us with perhaps some guide points there. But I also think and know that the leadership of the Republican Party at the end of the day understands that its survival is going to be contingent on being able to do this. And how do we expand the ambit? How do we expand the pie of how we talk about these things? Because yes, the grievances of folks who are feeling left behind are real. They're real. And if it happens that they default to, things that are perhaps the way that they've always been, that too has to change. And so, like I said, we haven't had that type of leadership in this country for a couple of generations. The last thing that I'll say to this is that in the past, people went into public service because they felt that that was their obligation and duty as good citizens. That happens far too infrequently today. And like I said, I think the notion of national service, I would support that 100%. And I think the more opportunities that we can give to young people to engage in some form of national service, however it is. You could be on the Conservation Corps. Let's go back to some of the New Deal stuff. You could go, let's expand the Peace Corps. Let's expand Teach America. Obviously, there's an opportunity for people to do it in the military too. But I think that's what we have to do. We have to figure out a way to talk about the change that we're enduring. Because, listen, my head spins when I think about all the things that have changed in my life.
Congressman, you wanted to respond to that.
Just real briefly, I do think that what you're asking is the right thing to do. I do think that's my responsibility to lead and not just follow the populism wave. However, politicians are represented out of their communities and by other communities, and many of them are going to reflect, and you know that. So I don't know that you can expect you got people in R plus 30 districts, they're going to be populist more likely than not, and the D plus 30, you're going to get the same. Some will not, some will, some will not. I just think it's probably a lot too much to expect that all of them are going to be above that fray, because I think a lot of them do represent the passions of their district, and you can see that in our dialogue right now. I just wanted to throw that out there. I think it's got to be more than our politicians. Our politicians reflect the communities we come from to a degree, and though I share, I think, the responsibility that the professor's talking about here, many of them do not. So you can't just count on the politicians. I think we need pastors speaking on this. I think we need teachers speaking on this. I think we need commentators, whether in the Omaha World Herald or the editorial page. I think it's got to be more than just the politicians would be my comeback. I think we need it at every level. People speaking out at our churches or as parents. We got to be doing it. That's probably the most important responsibility.
Well, I'll alter it a little bit.
Okay.
Our leadership class.
Yeah.
Okay? Our leadership class. And it has so many different permutations and manifestations today. And that's one of the things we're very conscious of. You know, we know we've got some remarkable students, and all our universities do in the state of Nebraska. We do a really good job in public education. Our kids are well prepared. So what we have to do is begin to imbue them with that sensitivity.
Yeah.
You're going to be leaders in society, so this is what you need to be conscious of.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that leader question in just a second, but I'm going to give Ms. Martinez an opportunity to speak her piece also on this topic of deep division and what kinds of things are you seeing. And let me ask you also to phrase that in terms of what can we do as individuals? What do you do when you boil that down to the actions of one person and say,
Yeah.
these are the deep divisions and this is how I can fix it?
I think that, the deep division comes from our inability to listen to one another and our inability to empathize with one another. And I think a lot of it comes with our differences in what we think is right and what we think is a problem, or, if we're denying that there's a racial tension problem, we're not going to agree. If we're denying that there's not police brutality, or we're going to disagree, or we're on the all lives matter, we do, as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, yes, we do know that all lives matter. But how are you showing up for the people who are fighting for police brutality? Like, I think a lot of it comes from, a lot of people just don't care. It's not affecting me, so I'm in the middle, or I just don't care, and then now we're divided. And so, in Omaha, when we were protesting, it was people of all different cultures, all different backgrounds. Like, I was with 50-year-old white guys, and 50-year-old black guys, and 50-year-old Hispanic guys, and men and women and kids and children, and it was like, wow, this is how we should be. Anytime that something is happening that's not right, we should be in unison with one another. So to go back to your question, what do? We show up for one another. Now that I have cultivated brothers and sisters all over the city, I'm not going to go out there and not fight for them, because that is my brother and my sister. And so now it creates this togetherness. Now we're not divided, because I do recognize that there is an issue, and whatever it could be, and I'm going to fight with you and stand behind you in order to make change. And I think that goes back into your change. Like, people are afraid of change. But it's like, how can we be afraid of change when change is going to happen no matter what? And we either get all on board together or we get divided. And so, like you said, I think that it's just super important to show up for one another and to be there for each other. And that's going to cultivate, us working maybe on both sides of the aisle. We're going to start seeing people work together in politics and economically. And so I am hopeful that we can do it.
If I may
Thank
just,
you. Yes.
to show you how dysfunctional Congress is on this particular topic. So there was a wide agreement that we needed some police reforms. And you looked at the Republican proposals, primarily in the Senate, I'm on the House side, you had the Democratic proposals. If you overlaid them, there was 70% agreement. There was disagreement on 30%. So what do? Nothing. That doesn't make sense. We could have at least agreed on 70% and at least passed, we could have passed 2/3, 3/4 of the reforms like mandatory web body cams. That's just one of the many things out there. But because we couldn't agree on 100%, it just ground to a halt and we got 0 done. And I'm of the position that we could have done at least 70% and passed a bill that got mandatory body cams and better training. There's a variety of things we could have done. But what we got done was 0 because it was all or nothing approach and it's failing our country.
So how do we get away from the all or nothing approach?
I don't know. I'm one of the people working in the problem solvers, and I would have agreed to the 70%.
Yeah.
I would, and I think maybe too, you could have said, well, 70% was probably more Republican. Well, maybe we could have done 80, 85. I don't know. We just never. There was these 2 proposals. They both got voted down because there was a filibuster in the Senate.
Yeah.
You had to get 60 votes. Neither side got 60 votes, so they just let it go. And I think that's not good leadership. We should have been able to sit down and hashed out something where nobody was totally happy, but not totally mad either.
Yeah.
Doing nothing was not the right answer.
Right.
So we could have had mandatory body cams today,
Yeah.
but we didn't get that passed. I
Well-
think that was a mistake.
Thank you for recognizing, when leadership isn't working in our favor. So.
Doctor, you had mentioned a little while ago about leaders. You had brought up the term of leaders. We've all, in some form here today, have talked about leadership. And Free Speech member Carrie Winter posed a good question. And this is one that you have to maybe think and say, I'm going to just give my opinion on this because there's no concrete answer to this question. Carrie's question is, do you believe that some of the political divide of today is because of a lack of an inspirational leader? And you mentioned it's been a few decades since we've truly had inspiration. And we've all talked about inspiration being part of leadership. Just briefly, all of you touch a little bit on that question. Is some of our divide and some of the reason we can't come together the fact that we don't have an inspirational leader at this moment? Doctor?
A lot of times, and especially in the political process through elections, we're voting not for somebody but against somebody else. And I would hope that as we think about this, that and there are inspirational leaders. I mean, people can say what they want to about her, but AOC is inspirational.
Yes.
Right? Granted, she's going to bring a different perspective to the table than most of us. Being a millennial, she's my daughter's generation, and I got a lot of respect for her. And perhaps there's others like her. There are others on the Republican side too, on the conservative side. That's the other part of it. We've lost the sense of what it means to be conservative in this country today. The conservatives today are not the conservatives I grew up, not the William F. Buckleys of the world. They don't articulate in the same manner, and I think that
The
somehow
Facebook comments are going to start blowing up now. That you said
it's quite all right. It's quite all right.
By the way, I like William F. Buckley.
Bring it on because I'm going to give you a quick example. So I actually one of my roommates in college was the president of the Young Republicans at UCLA. Okay, why? I love the way that guy talked and thought. I didn't agree with anything he said. Not a damn thing. But, we could sit and talk about things and try to kind of puzzle through. And it was a very rich experience for me. And I take some of that from my experience in the military, having me already conditioned to be open to the difference in perspective. And I think that what I would hope for, and then this is one of the things that we're intentionally trying to do as we develop young people at the university, is to give them a sense that their intellectual capacity is naturally going to lead them into an area where they can become an industry leader and a thought leader and an inspirational leader of the type that will lead us forward. I truly believe it. That's why I'm in the game of education, because for me, hope springs eternal every single year. I mean, I get a rebirth every September. when this new crop of kids comes in and they're bright-eyed and they want to conquer the world. So how can we enable them to become that generation of inspirational leaders? Leadership development is integral to what we need to be doing much more intentionally in higher education. I don't think we've kind of left it because it's mostly been kind of a perverse vocational technical experience. Well, what kind of a job am I going to get? The question is, how am I going to lead society?
And Don, you wanted to respond to that, but also make sure that you talk to us about inspirational leaders. And do we have a lack of inspirational leaders? And answer that question.
I do think we have a dearth of this inspirational leadership right now. One of the most important things in leadership is having a noble vision. I worked for 20 lieutenant colonels before I became one, 5 colonels before I became one, and then I worked for 15 generals thereafter, and sometime as a general, working for like 3 and 4 stars. The best leaders have noble vision. You're excited about being part of that team because you're not just flying a mission or you're just not paving a highway. You're looking at the broad. What does it mean? And what's the benefit for the broader team? What are you doing for your country? And we are lacking in that area right now. I believe we do have an increase in populism right now. It's easy to demagogue the other side and build on anger, but it's not helpful. It doesn't propel us forward. I think we are looking for leaders who have a more inspirational message about the country and the potential of our country still. And my favorite leaders, when I look back, Abraham Lincoln's my favorite president. He did some unpopular things, but he did the right things. And he paid for it with his life, obviously. And I just admire him when you read how he put his administration together and the failures he had beforehand. And that's another thing about leadership. Leadership is you're going to lose at times. You're going to take punches to the gut. You're going to get kicked in the shins. You got to get back up and get back in the fray, and he did throughout his life. Winston Churchill, the same thing. He saw Nazi Germany as a threat in 1932, and nobody wanted to see a threat at that point. They were still coming out of World War I, but yet he identified it and also identified Soviet Union as a threat before anybody wanted to identify them as a threat. I thought that he was inspirational. Martin Luther King had great ideas how to make our country better, and he paid for it with his life. Noble ideas is what people are attracted to that, and we do need more of that today about our country and our society and the role of our country and the role of our communities. And so yes, we need more of that.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, talk to us about inspirational leaders and maybe even talk to us about inspirational leaders at all levels.
Yeah, I'd agree with both the gentlemen I'm sitting here with today that, we are lacking in that. But I think that as much as it is important to look up to somebody, you got to look within yourself first. What am I doing as a citizen, as an individual in society to lead the people around me? What choices am I making? Am I making the right choices? Am I making choices that follow moral obligation? Our president maybe didn't, our last president, Donald Trump, maybe didn't, he wasn't saying the right messages to unify the country or to unify Democrats and Republicans. But, regardless of that, who are we within ourselves? What are we talking about at the dinner table with our friends? How can we be unified within each other more than looking at somebody else to unify us? So yeah, I think it's important, to have noble leadership, and I'll always vote, to have noble leadership and encourage noble leadership. But I think it's also important to find that noble leadership within ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you all for the response to that question. We're in our last 10 minutes, and at this time I think I would like to remind everyone about signing up for our email list. If you want to be on our email list, if you're not already on there, to email info@freespeechsociety.org, and you'll make sure to get notifications about all of our upcoming events. And then you can always find us on our Facebook page, and if you're not a member, you can ask to join and connect with us that way. A question a little bit off of the topic of individualism. This was posed by a couple of different people here. Senator John McAllister and Jody Nethery Castro posed a similar question, and it is, and I'm going to start with you, Don. Do office holders have the obligation to tell the truth.
Yes. And it doesn't mean you have to be rude or belittling in doing it. You can speak the truth. You have to speak the truth, I believe. Some people say, but you don't want to do it in a belittling way, but I think there's a tactful way. But yes, it's our responsibility to say the truth.
Okay. Doctor?
You know, it's imperative that be the basis of how they engage with their constituents. You know, to give them the unvarnished truth. To be sensitive, though, to how we communicate that information, because it's not going to sit well with some folks. And my hope is that as we try to navigate through these difficult discussions and dialogues that we're having around race, around economics, around public policy, that our political class can and does do that. You know. And you know, like I said, the Congressman made a really good example. I've attended one of his public forums. It was not pretty. You know, and I mean, he's just sitting there listening, and people are screaming at the top of their lungs. Now, granted, there is righteous indignation and righteous anger, and we need to be able to acknowledge that. And I thought he did a really good job of trying to field it, but at the end of the day, the person wasn't listening. All they were was, it was going in one direction. There was no opportunity for this interaction. And so that's a tough one. That is a tough one. Yes, at the end of the day, they must tell the truth, but also understanding where people are coming from and who they're engaging with, their constituents. Because ultimately, that's who he works for.
But doesn't that also mean that at the same time that they have an obligation to not spread disinformation?
Who, elected officials?
Yes.
Oh yeah, imperative.
Yes.
Imperative. And if they do, and if they're kind of, you know, offering us canards or half truths or what have you, that's not good.
If I could just follow up, I don't well, Alexis may want
you're
to
okay.
speak in here on this too. I believe there's absolute truth. Sometimes I may not absolutely know what that is. I'm seeking it. I do believe in absolute truth. I believe in the Bible for one. However, we got to realize in this discussion of truth, that two different groups of people can have what they think is the truth and disagree. So therefore, I believe that I owe it to the constituents to be honest and truthful and respectful. But maybe the group over here, they believe their truth, what's truth. And that's where we have to be careful, because we're convinced we're the truth. And now we're attacking the other folks who think they're in the truth. So this is where we have to be this respectful and start, and it gets back to empathy again, where we have to, okay, now why do they believe what they believe? And so sometimes good people disagree on what truth is, and there has to be an acknowledgement of that, even though I do believe in absolute truth, but I don't always claim I know it at times. You know, I'm seeking it.
And religion is a great example.
Right.
Because the Bible as a book, there are some who believe it's the absolute written truth, and there are others who believe that it's metaphor. And the goal, really, I think, in a discussion of that is to not demonize one side over the other, and to say, you can believe what you want to believe, but I'm going to believe this, but that we respect one another's opinion over that. And if we could take that example to a lot of other facets of society, I think we could start to build not only consensus, but more respect for one another. I believe that there is that we've lost some respect, let's say, over the last few years, and it seems to have gotten worse, and we need to reverse that trend and start repairing. Ms. Martinez, talk a little bit about
repairing the respectful
thought.
dialogue, and
Yep.
and yeah, I mean, I would hope our elected officials do tell us the truth and nothing but the truth. But again, it's like it is what people choose to believe to be the truth, and that's kind of gonna always be there. You know, it's, you know, we're not always gonna agree on everything, but it's what we can agree on, you know, and disagree on in a respectful manner.
Another question, and this is less about personal responsibility and more about a government's responsibility to its citizens. We look at the power grid in Texas and what's currently going on right now, and we talk about the government's responsibility to individuals in that respect. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was doing an ag tour out in western Nebraska. I'm on the agriculture committee, And so my background's corn and soybeans. Out in Western Nebraska, they have sugar beets, dry beets, different commodities out there. But this topic came up, and somebody wanted me to be a hammer or attack on what happened in Texas with a particular political angle. And I said, well, first of all, I need to know for sure more what the truth is, what happened. And what I think happened was Texas is not used to 0-degree weather. So what you saw was a power grid to include natural gas and wind turbines that froze up. A lot of people wanted to attack the wind turbines or the gas part of it, depending on their political spectrum, right? And I would say they both froze up as far as I can tell. And the real issue is Texas has got one of the record cold streaks in there, and that infrastructure wasn't made for 0-degree weather. To me, that's my honest view of the facts that I have. But yet I was being pressured from people to attack and use it as a political avenue to go after someone. I didn't feel good about it because I think that Texas is not used to being Nebraska. And so if anything, I'd go back and say we need to harden our power grid infrastructure in Texas to take colder weathers. Because what we do is we build infrastructure for norms, but there's always these outliers, and that's what gets us, right? And we have to probably broaden our outlying capacity for the power grid. And frankly, Nebraska's power grid was up to the task, but we had to loan energy or give energy to Texas so that they could get by in this terrible time for them. And so that's the facts that I am aware of. And people wanted to use this opportunity to demagogue, and I don't think it was the right time to do it. I don't even think it was right. So that's my view.
But that does bring up the topic, though, too, and Free Speech
Yeah.
member Mark Welsh wants to know, does an event like this,
And I know Mark; he's a good guy.
yeah, do you think that has you thinking more about co-sponsoring the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act?
The dividend, yeah. And he is a great proponent for this. I've been working with him on this for about 5 years. I am not a fan, and he knows this. We go back. We've been talking about this for a while. I'm not a big fan of carbon taxes. I don't like punishing behavior. I like incentivizing behavior as a principle, right? So I don't know if the Dividend Act actually would solve the problem what we saw in Texas, frankly. I mean, what you saw is a failure in the natural gas and the wind turbines, right? What really needs to be done is a hardening of that infrastructure for colder temperatures. The reality. I think to me, that's just the facts of it.
Okay.
But I am a proponent for all the above energy, and I also know that the green energy or renewable energy has to be an important part of our portfolio. But you can't. I don't believe we're at the point now where you can just be that. You have to have a baseline or base load, they call it, for situations like what we just had. So I've always looked for having a balanced portfolio, and we have that in Omaha. 40% of our energy is renewable, which is, I think, most people don't realize that's a tremendous thing. So I'm not on where he's at,
Okay.
but I do support a balanced portfolio with renewables in it.
Okay, thank you. We're down to the last couple minutes, and what I'm going to do is, Doctor, you wanted to respond to
Right.
this topic, but then I also would like you to wrap up with a closing thought, and then we'll
Okay.
allow
Okay.
the other two.
Well, Texas, epic policy failure. I'm an energy policy analyst, okay? 1989, very similar deep freeze. 2011, very similar deep freeze. In 2012, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, issued a report with recommendations, 5-star recommendations. You need to harden your infrastructure because guess what? These are going to become more regular types of occurrences. And so FUI on Texas, they blew it completely. They have been given forewarning, not only with this incident, but other incidents that have occurred over the course of the last 30 years to be prepared for what occurred. More than 50 people have died in Texas. That's an epic public policy failure. It doesn't have a political mother or father. That's just policy that's just been done wrong. Now, granted, Texas is its own country, literally. They see themselves that way too, And so they have to bear all the responsibility. And so for them, rather than trying to blame somebody else, they need to assume responsibility for that. I think that's the first step. In closing, I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. This has been a very rich and robust opportunity for me to kind of share some of my insights. You know, at the end of the day, for me, what it's really all about is that how do we build a better society? What tools do I, as an educator, give to the folks that I come into contact with? Not just my students, but my colleagues as well. Because, you know, I do believe in lifelong learning. I believe that we always have an opportunity every single day to do better. And, you know, and I'll just leave with one quote. So about 2001, I went to a conference in Washington, D.C. Nan Cohen was the president of Duke University, said she loved being in education because it was the only job in the world where she got to help people to be better people every day. I've taken that to heart, and I believe it to my core. And so, you know, this is what I love doing. So I want to thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you guys for inviting me. This has been great. It's been, you know, educational. I'd like to quote Jesse Jackson. He said, "We must live together as brothers and sisters or die as fools." And I think, you know, the biggest thing here today is dig deeper into yourself. You know, ask yourself, what do you want your society to look like in the next 5 years, and start to care about, you know, the policies and things that go into place and into being a good citizen. And I think that, you know, we control our own destiny and we're in control. And I'd just like to leave with just to show up for one another and empathize and listen and love each other.
I think the most important thing we can do, and we all have a role here, is remember the golden rule: treat others the way we want to be treated. Also, I think we've said repeatedly the empathy part. We're going to disagree. I think it's been enjoyable for me in the last 4 years to meet with people with such different opinions of mine, sit down and just try to understand where they come from and why. And to me, it's enjoyable actually to have that process and to meet people. I mean, we're all a product of where we came from. I was a farm kid till I was 21. Then I joined the military for 30 years. That's my reality. That's what I know. But there's 500 different realities that people can have. And so it's important to understand where people come from and to learn from it and to respect it even when we disagree. So I think the golden rule is, and we can do that at every level where we're at, whether you're an elected official, professor, student, whatever it may be. And we all have the chance to change, help be a positive change in our circle. And everybody has a different looking circle. Right. Secondly, I think the best leaders I've worked with have also been great mentors. And they're always looking to figure out how they can help someone that's more junior or coming through the ranks, whatever it may be. And I think we also should be looking for opportunities to, how can we help someone climb the next rung or learn or be better in whatever areas of life we're in. Like I said, I worked for 15 different generals, and I thought the best ones not only got the mission done, but they were dedicated to growing people with them. And I think we can apply that almost in any capacity that we're in our society. But thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I really enjoyed the panel.
Yes.
Congressman Don Bacon, thank you so much, and thank you to Dr. Jonathan Benjamin Alvarado, and thank you to Ms. Alexis Martinez. And we thank you for being with us here today, and I would not, or I guess I would say I would be remiss without thanking the Live from Mars House crew, Brent Melnick and Mars Booth, behind the scenes here doing this wonderful production here for us today, and like to give a promotion for them too. On this channel, they do live music shows here Wednesdays at 5 p.m. and Saturdays at 7 p.m. And they're also on YouTube, and there's a higher resolution stream on twitch.tv. And we'll be back here in March with another presentation. Look out for more of that information. And then remember to connect with us by email so that you continue to get our email updates. Go to info@freespeechnebraska.org and sign up. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you guys. That was awesome. That was very enjoyable.
So it's the one that's turned off.
Yeah.